If you're hearing this, I'm still on the ridge. I made the mistake. I read the rusted iron post out loud. It said, 2 miles to the gap. I've been walking south for 4 hours, and I just stepped right back into the same clearing. The marker didn't move, but the numbers changed. It says 0 now, and something is standing right behind the iron.
Now hush. Let old Abe catch his breath a spell, and I'll tell you the whole of it, slow, the way it's owed to be told. My name is Silas Vance. Folks up here just call me Abe, on account of my granddaddy was named Abraham, and I favor him more than my own kin favored my own name. I've lived on this mountain the whole of my 71 years, and I've buried more neighbors to the fog than I've buried to sickness or to age. That ought to tell you something about these ridges. It ought to tell you that the mountain keeps its own ledger, separate from the one the county keeps, and it don't forgive a debt just because you didn't know you owed it. This here's the story of a young man named Caleb Whitfield, though names don't much matter to the fog. The fog only cares what you say out loud when you're standing in the wrong place at the wrong hour. Caleb was a hiker, a good one, the kind who'd done his research, who'd read his maps proper, who carried a paper topo folded soft in a plastic sleeve inside his jacket, right along with a compass that still worked, even when the batteries and everything else had long since given out. He was 34 years old, unmarried, come up from one of the flatland cities to walk the high ridge trail that cuts along the spine of this mountain, the one the old-timers call the Widow's Seam, on account of how it splits the rock like a scar that never healed proper. He'd started his walk in the late afternoon, when the light still had some gold left in it, when the leaves were turning that deep rust orange that means autumn's got its claws all the way in. He meant only to walk a short stretch before making camp, just enough to get the ache of the flatlands out of his legs. But the fog up here doesn't wait for a man's schedule. It doesn't care that he's got a headlamp with fresh batteries, or a granola bar in his pocket, or a phone with no signal bars but a full charge. The fog comes up out of the hollows like it's been breathing under the mountain for 1,000 years, patient, slow, and it doesn't so much roll in as it settles, the way a held breath settles once you finally let it go. By full dark, Caleb was walking in a fog so thick and so white, it looked like he was wading through spoiled milk. His headlamp only carved out a small, trembling circle of white in front of his boots, maybe 6 feet, no more. And beyond that circle, the world simply wasn't there anymore. No stars, no moon, no sound of cars on the county road far below. Because there is no county road up on the Widow's Seam. Not for 11 miles in any direction. Just the drip of fog condensing off the hickory leaves, and the wet crunch of his own boots in the mud, and his own breathing, which had gotten a little too loud and a little too fast for a man who kept telling himself over and over that he wasn't lost. Not yet. Not really. Now understand something about this fog, if you're going to understand anything at all about what happened to that boy. It isn't ordinary weather. Down in the flatlands, fog is just water waiting on the sun. Up here, on the old ridges, the fog has history in it. My granddaddy used to say the fog remembers everybody who ever got lost inside it. That it holds on to 'em the way a cellar holds on to a smell. Faint, but never quite gone. He said the Cherokee who hunted this ridge long before any Vance ever set an axe to these trees had a word for it that meant something close to the breath of the hollow. And they'd not walk the seam after dark for love or money. Not during the turning of the leaves, when the veil between the mountains' two geographies is said to run thinnest. Caleb didn't know any of that, of course. Walking along with his good boots and his careful gear, city-bred and confident in the notion that a compass and a map could account for the whole of the world. He'd packed for rain and packed for cold, but a man cannot pack for a mountain that doesn't want to be measured. The temperature had been dropping steady since sundown. That particular damp cold that settles into a person's joints and doesn't ask permission. And every so often a gust would move through the fog without stirring so much as a single leaf, which is a wrongness a body feels in the back of the neck long before the mind puts a name to it. He passed an old fence line, half swallowed by blackberry bramble. The kind of fence that hasn't held in a cow or a sheep in the better part of a century. Its cedar posts gone soft and gray, leaning every which way like old men fallen asleep standing up. He passed a place where the trail forked, though his map showed no fork at all. And he stood there a long minute deciding, his light doing little against the white, before choosing the path that felt to his tired legs like it bent the way south ought to bend. It did not matter which fork he chose. It never does, once the mountain has decided to take an interest in you. He'd checked his compass a dozen times. He'd checked his topographic map with his headlamp cupped in his palm so the fog wouldn't soak through the plastic sleeve. And by every reading he had, by every careful measurement of ridge and hollow and the angle of the old fence line, he should have crossed a saddle in the land nearly 2 hours back and dropped down toward a lean-to shelter marked plain on his map. He hadn't found the saddle. He hadn't found the shelter. What he found, a little after 11 that night, standing crooked in the mud at an angle no fence post or trail marker has any right to stand, was the iron. Now I want you to picture it the way Caleb told it to me, because I only heard this account secondhand, whispered to me by a man who does not whisper easy. The iron marker stood maybe 3 feet out of the ground, thick as a fence post, but rounder, older, pitted so deep with rust that it looked less like metal and more like the fossil of metal, like something that had died and turned to stone a long time before ironworking ever came up this mountain. It leaned toward the trail at an angle that made a man's stomach turn just looking at it, the way a rotted tooth leans in a jaw. And down near its base, worn but still legible if you got your light close enough,
Someone or something had carved numbers into the surface, deep grooves gone black with age and damp. Caleb told me his flashlight caught the numbers before his mind caught the wrongness of the thing. That's often how it goes. The eyes report before the gut can warn you. And what the numbers said, carved crooked into that ancient iron, was this: 2 miles to the gap. There is no gap on any map of the Widow's Seam. There has never been a gap on any map of the Widow's Seam. I have walked this ridge since before that boy's mother was ever born, and I can tell you plain there is no marker of any kind out there, iron or wood or stone, not one that any surveyor or county road crew ever planted. That marker does not belong to this world's geography. It belongs to the mountain's older geography, the one underneath the one we draw on paper, the one that only shows itself to a man who is tired enough and lost enough and scared enough to want an answer bad enough to say it out loud. And that's a mistake. That's the one unspoken rule of these high ridges that near every family up here still teaches its children. Quiet. Around a wood stove. The way you'd teach a child not to touch a viper. If you find an iron marker that isn't on your map, you look at it all you like. You can even touch it, though most won't. But you never, under any circumstance, no matter how tired or how scared or how desperate for comfort you are, read the number carved into it out loud. Not in your normal voice, not in a whisper, not even mouthing it silent under your breath in a way another living soul could hear the shape of. Because the numbers aren't a distance, not truly. They're an anchor point. And a mountain like this one, it doesn't hold its shape the way flatland does. It folds. It's been folding for longer than there have been white men, or red men, or any men at all up here to fold it. Doubling back on itself in places. Hollow inside hollow inside hollow, like a paper fan closed up tight. Most of the time, that folded geometry sleeps. It just sits there in the fog, quiet, harmless as an old scar. But you say those numbers out loud, and you give that geometry your voice as an anchor, and the fold wakes up around you, and it takes you in. Caleb didn't know any of that, of course. All he knew was that he was tired and cold and turned around, and that seeing a distance marker, any distance marker, even a strange and ancient one, felt like the first good news he'd had in hours. So he shone his light square on that pitted iron face, and in a voice gone hoarse with relief, he read it out loud. 2 miles to the gap. He told me the fog changed right then. Not dramatically. Not the way you'd expect if you'd only ever heard these stories told loud, with music swelling and thunder cracking. No, the fog just got a little colder, a little closer to his skin, like a held breath drawn in and never let back out. He walked on, southward, same as his compass told him, same direction the old marker's numbers implied. And for the first hour, nothing much seemed wrong, save that the trees kept looking the same split hickory, forked low near its base, the same fallen chestnut log, half swallowed by moss, that he was almost certain he'd stepped over once already. He told himself the fog does that, makes everything look alike. Flatlanders get turned around by fog all the time, and there was no shame in it. So he kept his pace steady and his light forward, and did not let himself think too hard on the coincidence. By the second hour, he could no longer pretend it was coincidence. The fourth time he passed that same split hickory, that same moss-swallowed chestnut log, he stopped his feet cold in the mud and simply stood there a long while, listening to his own heartbeat pound up in his ears, because there was nothing else left up there in that fog to listen to. And then, dead ahead of him, right where his light fell, he saw the iron marker again. Same crooked lean, same terrible angle, waiting for him like it had never moved an inch, like it had simply let the whole mountain rotate quietly around itself while he walked in a straight line going nowhere at all. But the numbers had changed. 1 mile to the gap. He did not read it aloud this time. He'd learned that much on instinct alone, some old animal part of him understanding, even without the old stories to teach him, that speaking to the thing again would only tighten whatever knot already had him. But not speaking didn't free him either. He walked on, faster now, nearly running, his breath ragged and his light swinging wild across the white wall of fog to either side of the trail. And hour by hour, loop by loop, the same hickory, the same log, the same crooked iron waiting patient in the mud. The numbers kept falling. 1/2 mile, 1/4 mile, 500 feet. And with every loop, he said, the fog around the marker thickened just a little more than the fog everywhere else, curling close around that pitted iron post like it was hiding something behind it, cradling it, keeping something warm that had waited a long, long while for its turn. And on the loop where the numbers read only 100 feet, he told me he heard it for the first time. A sound low and dry, like a fingernail, if a fingernail could grow to the length of a fence rail, dragging slow across corrugated rust. Scrape, Pause. Scrape. Patient as the mountain itself. Not hurried. Never hurried. Because whatever waited behind that iron already understood it, had all the time remaining that Caleb had left to give it, and not 1 second more. He did not see it, not fully, only the suggestion of a shape in the fog behind the post, tall, too tall, with shoulders that dipped wrong at the joint, and one long, pale limb curled around the iron's rusted edge. Its fingers, if you could rightly call them fingers, hooked deep into the pitted grooves of the numbers themselves, as though it were the very thing keeping count. That's when Caleb did the only thing left a man in his position could do. He turned on the little voice recorder in his pocket, the one he'd brought along only to leave notes to himself about trail conditions, and he spoke into it low and fast, telling whoever might find it what had happened, what mistake he'd made, what rule he'd broken without ever having been taught it. He told them the numbers were down to 0 now. He told them the shape was standing just behind the iron, closer than it had ever stood before, close enough now that the cold coming off it reached him even through the fog. And that, my friend, is where the recording that boy left behind comes to its end. They never found Caleb Whitfield's body. Search parties walked that ridge for the better part of 3 weeks, and all they ever recovered was his pack, sitting neat and dry at the base of an old split hickory tree, and half buried in the mud beside it, an iron marker so rusted and pitted that the county surveyor swore up and down it had to have been sitting there, forgotten, for the better part of 200 years. No numbers on it at all by the time they found it. Smooth iron, worn featureless, like something had rubbed it clean. So here is Abe's rule, same as it was told to me by my own granddaddy, sitting by a wood stove not so different from mine. If you're ever walking these ridges in the fog, and your light catches on an iron marker that isn't drawn on any map you're carrying, you look away first, if you can manage it. You keep walking, same direction, same pace, and you don't so much as whisper the number carved into it, not even to yourself, not even just to know it. Let the mountain keep its own secrets. Let the fold stay asleep, because somewhere out there tonight, in the milk-white fog along the widow's seam, that iron post is still standing crooked in the mud, and it's still counting, and it don't much care whose voice gives it the next number to count down from. Sleep well now, friend, and should the fog ever find you high up on a ridge you don't recognize, you just keep walking, whatever you do, Don't read the numbers.